Hi everyone, I'm Russ Cohen and I'm from the town of Arlington, Mass. And I grew up in the town of Weston, Mass. And I spent a lot of time playing in the woods as a kid. And I got into the edible wild plants when I was a senior in high school. And that was a long time ago, and I continue to do it. And it's great to be able to be with you in an in-person Wild Edibles Walk today. So as you may know, the history of this property is that it was once part of the water supply for the town of Clinton. And then Clinton got on the Wachusett Reservoir and the MWA system. And so these became sort of a backup water supply. And then there was a point where Nestle was sniffing around, talking about possibly putting in some wells and selling spring water. And a lot of people in town, with good reason, I might add, were nervous about that, because part of what makes this property cool ecologically is the presence of water here. And if the land dried up because so much of the water was being sucked up through pipes and being trucked away and sold, it would change how things were here. So anyway, so the town of Sterling said, we have another idea. Let's just save this land as open space. And so that's basically the outcome of what's happened here. And this is we're going to go in one very small section today, maybe 5% of the entire hundreds and hundreds of acres of land that are part of this system here. So if you go to, I think if you just Google Sterling Trails, you'll go to a wonderful web page that has printable maps. I've actually have them right here, you know, where there's also brochures that describe what you see along the trail and stuff like that. And so this is the Lindy Basin Trail, which actually the map doesn't show where we are right now, so it's a little confusing. But anyway, if you can put two and two together and you toggle back and forth between Google Maps and All Trails and the other information that's available, you can figure out where we are and stuff. So we're going to walk by some waterways that are hydrologically connected to some of the former Clinton water supply reservoirs. And actually, it's a very short loop we're going to take today, so this is not going to be an aerobic workout on this walk, because I'm going to be stopping constantly to talk about stuff. The first plant we'll talk about is right up by my car, and we're going to see it in the woods, but I can show you the important thing to look for on the plant that isn't on this plant, but I have some in my car. But anyway, so we're going to go down this trail and parallel this road for about a half of a mile, come back out on the road, and then walk along the road carefully to get back. That's the plan. All right, so at any point, if you say, oh gosh, I forgot, I've got, you know, something else I have to do, it's very easy to get back out to where we are right now, either by retracing your steps or just keep going and then back out to the road. All right, any questions so far? All right, so yeah, so let me hop down and we'll talk about this one plant right here. So this is a species I don't think we're going to see in the walk today, but it is my #1 favorite edible species, so I wanted to be sure to teach it to you. This is the Shagbark hickory. Is there anybody here that would not be able to recognize the Shagbark hickory tree? Okay, so that's okay. Right? They really have shaggy bark, and it stands out quite dramatically, and you see a lot of them along the roadsides in any sort of farmy area in Sterling-Lancaster and all the towns around here. They're quite common. And what you'll see, if you're lucky, is a pile of these piled right along the roadside underneath the tree. So you can just hang out by the, you know, just find a safe place to park along the roadside. And, you know, when I was in Connecticut gathering these yesterday, there was some, you know, right along the road, and then there was a stone wall, and then there was some in the mowed field on the other side of the stone wall. So I went and knocked on the door of the person who owns that field, and I described what I was doing, and this wonderful woman came out, and she said, I used to do that. Yes, please, you know, knock yourself out, pick all you want. And so in terms of where to go harvesting, ideally, if there is somebody to ask, and they say yes, that's a great thing, because then you could just joyfully pick, and you don't have to be looking over your shoulder saying, is somebody gonna, you know, get on my case for doing this? So that's excellent. Another place, as long as I'm talking about places to go gather stuff. So the agency I used to work for, the Mass Department of Fish and Game, has a Division of Fisheries and Wildlife, and they maintain what are called wildlife management areas. These are WMAs. And they allow gathering nuts and berries and mushrooms at WMAs, as long as you do it for personal consumption only. So you're not picking anything and selling it or giving it to somebody else who would sell it, like to a restaurant, for example. But if it's just for you, you can do it. So if you go to masswildlife.org, you can pull up the wildlife lands viewer and see where these properties are. And there's a lot in Worcester County. Another place to go foraging is at organic farms, and I don't mean to deter you from patronizing the organic farm stand, getting a CSA share if that'll work for you, because as many weeds and invasive plants there are out there, and we're going to see several today, there aren't enough to really make a significant dent in our food supply. So we need to be growing food, and organic is a great way to do it. So organic farms are a great place to pick stuff. Why is that? Well, reason number one is the obvious one. They're not slathering everything with chemicals. Reason number two is the way they manage weeds at organic farms is they do it strategically. They're not weeding every square inch of the farm every single day. They weed where they need to, and the other places they kind of just let go. And so if you time your visit to an organic farm right, you can find huge amounts of weeds, enough to feed whole armies. So when, looking optimistically in the future, we can have large dinner parties again, and you need lots of raw material, you can go to an organic farm and find all you need that way. Then the wonderful living organic soil that's making the organically grown vegetables so nutritious to eat, all the good stuff is getting into the weeds too. So the weeds you harvest at organic farms are going to be relatively large and luscious and delicious and nutritious, better than, let's say, weed growing in a crack in a sidewalk. And then the last reason is the weeds that the organic farms often have good edge habitats where fruits and fruit trees, nut trees, berry bushes, stuff like that grow. So my advice is form a symbiotic relationship with your local organic farmer, because they have the weeds, you want the weeds, so potentially it's a great partnership. So you don't, once again, don't go there and start picking. Seek out a staff person, a manager, and ask them, is it okay? And often they'll say, what is it you're looking for? And let's pick a weed, purslane, for example. They say, oh yeah, go to that part of the farm because we haven't been there in a while. It's lousy with purslane. And that'll save you a lot of guesswork, so you have to wander around the farm trying to figure out where to get stuff. All right, so that's what I'm going to say about where to go and pick stuff. All right, so back to shagbark hickory. So as I say, you can find these just piled along the road. So a really fun way to gather them, this is a great time of year, as you know, to go bicycling. And so just bring some panniers or a rucksack or whatever with you, and it's very easy to fill it up. So often, the impact of the nut falling on the pavement will burst this part off. So this is the four-parted husk. So let me find one that comes off easily here. So you pull this apart like that.
It's like the squirrel.
And you see there's the nut inside. All right, and you might say, and the comment I get is, oh, I tried to eat those once and I couldn't get the nut meats out of the shell. So I think it's worthless. I'm going to show you how to get the nut meats out of the shell. First of all, and I'm really sorry that I can't share these with you today because of, the precautions and everything. I think I have some back here somewhere. Oh, I might have given them all away. Well, anyway, hold on just a second. So what I do is I just use a hammer. Okay,
yep.
So you do have to separate the nut meats from the shells, and that takes a little while. But if you're getting big pieces out like that, you can get quite a lot of yield. So about that much will be nuts in the container like this, and the rest are shells, which you can throw in your fireplace or whatever you want to do with them. They taste like walnuts have been lightly sprayed with maple syrup. Oh. So they're really excellent. All right, so here's the secret about getting them open. Is you tip the nut on its side like that. So this is in my hand. This is a hard surface like a rock, and I'm left-handed, so I'll hold it with my right hand. The hammer's in my left hand, and I hit it right there, right on the top of the shell, and I don't pulverize it, but I hit it just hard enough to send cracks through the shell. And more often than not, the two halves open right up, and that's how I get the big pieces out. Okay, that's the trick. All right, so when we get back, I have enough nuts here I'm happy to share if anybody wants to take some. And this is actually, when they're nice and fresh like this, you can grow hickory trees with nuts like this. So yeah, you could just stick it in the ground. Just, the standard advice is you want to stick it in the ground to about the depth of the thickness of the nut. So like 3/4 of an inch down underneath the ground. Because these nuts won't sprout until next spring because they're programmed to have to go through winter to break their dormancy. Right, so the challenge is, how do you prevent the squirrels and chipmunks from sniffing them out and digging them up? And that is a risk. So one way to get around that is just to store these in a moist plastic bag in your fridge for 6 months, and then sow them in March, and then they're not around as long enough. I still put the 1/2-inch mesh metal hardware cloth over every hickory nut that I plant, whether it's in a pot or in the ground. I protect it that way, and then the sprouted nut can grow through the mesh. All right, so remind me at the end, and I'm happy to share these with you. All right, but the main reason I wanted to bring you over here is to talk about another nut. Okay, so what you want to do is just position yourself where you can look at one of these bushes over here. So this one here, 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 they're all the same. Oh yeah, don't worry about that, it'll calm down. All right, so these are all hazelnut bushes. And one way to tell is that you look at the leaf, and the leaf is what is known as double-toothed. So if you look here, you can see the bigger teeth, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then a lot of little serrations between them. That's what's known as double-toothed. All right, and it's very typical to see hazelnuts on the edge of a road here, especially right underneath the power lines. So now the information I am about to give you, you have to file away for next year because you've just missed the season when these are ripe. This is an early September thing. Hickory nuts are just coming in now, so you have the next 2 or 3 weeks. Hickory nuts are going to be at their prime, and then black walnuts come in the second part of that time, so like second week October, that's when they come in. So you're in good shape for those. But these, you want to look for husks like this. So this is called the common hazelnut, and these look like a little head of cabbage, and so you see these on the plants like that, and the place I look for them is underneath power lines. And I don't think it's the electromagnetic radiation, I think it's all the sun that the plants get there, and they produce heavily. And one issue when you have plants like this that are right on the edge of all this wonderful habitat is the squirrels and the chipmunks can really work these bushes very assiduously, and so it's very unlikely you're going to find nuts in a bush with so much cover nearby. But if you find hazelnuts growing underneath the power lines out in the open in this wide power line corridor, that's a scary place for a chipmunk or squirrel to be because there's hawks and snakes and foxes and other things that might try to eat them. So I find the nuts persist on the bushes longer, but even so, you want to get out there and gather the nuts when they're still attached to the plant, still in the husk and still attached to the plant, because if you wait until they hit the ground, you will never find them. The squirrels and chipmunks will get them before you do, all right? So this is a little brown right now, but when this was on the plant, it was the color of the leaves with some yellowy brown color in it, and that's the perfect time to gather them when they're very close to being ripe but still attached to the plant. So I gather the entire husk, and then I spread these out on a newspaper, the floor of my garage, and leave them for a week or so, and then it's easy to get the nuts out. So if you just take a peek in here, you can see there's the hazelnut inside the husk, all right? So that's the very familiar looking hazelnut that you recognize from the store. All right, now I would be misleading you if I said to you, you haven't lived to try the flavor of a wild hazelnut, because it's the same flavor as a cultivated hazelnut, and the wild ones are smaller. And so you might say to yourself, I'm just going to go to the store and buy hazelnuts, which is perfectly fine. But I just want to assure you, I have gathered thousands of hazelnuts from the wild here in Central Mass, so it's definitely possible. All right?
Just one inside each husk?
No. So see, I pulled that one out there. There's another one here.
But each section has one.
Yeah, each section has one, yes. But there could be like 6 all attached together. All right, any questions on this one? All right, so the time to look for these is the second week of September. All right, so by now it's too late. All right, just as a preliminary thing to do in case there's anybody here that is not a confident identifier of poison ivy. There's quite a lot along the trail here. So this is it right here, right here, right here. Poison ivy, right here, 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 right here. I'm not worried about, Yeah, yeah. I'm not worried about getting it on my boots, but anyway, so yes, so I'm going to teach you an antidote to poison ivy in just a second. So, all right, now that we know that one, going down this way, you give that a sniff. You should get a nice smell from that. Are you?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. All right, give it a sniff. This is black or yellow birch. So,
Can you scratch one more for these ladies?
yes.
Let me just pass it back.
No, it's all right. There's plenty to go around. There you go.
Thank you.
Okay, so what you are sniffing is oil of wintergreen, and it is in the inner bark of the twigs. That's why I had to peel the twig for you to smell it. So it's in the inner bark of black or yellow birch trees, and we have both on this property here. So, so it really isn't important to be able to tell them apart. When they're small, I have trouble telling them apart. When they get big, it's easier, but you know, if you want to nibble on them, it's not important to know. So, like for example, these are black birch trees. So this is a black birch tree right here. So I just grabbed one that was lower, but this is the same idea. So, all right. So this is a fun one. Black or yellow birch is a fun one to find as you're hiking in the woods. You can just find a twig to chew on. If you're camping and you've forgotten your toothbrush, you can use a birch twig as a natural breath freshener.
Could you make an extract out of that by like boiling it down or?
I'll get to that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's all right.
Ahead of the game, sorry.
No worries. So anyway, so the chemical name for oil of wintergreen is methyl salicylate, and it is related to salicylic acid, which is the active ingredient in aspirin. So if you were hiking in the woods and you twisted your ankle, you could find a birch twig to chew on, and at the very least it would distract you from the pain in your ankle. All right, now you can make a tea from those birch twigs. It's very easy. You can do it any time of year. So in a patch like this where there's a whole bunch of you know, these sapling little things, you can just gather a few of the branches, just strip the leaves off them, and then cut them into lengths that they'll fit inside a tall jar like a mason jar. And then with a paring knife or a carrot peeler, just peel the outer bark off to expose the inner bark where the flavor is. And take the peeled twigs and the peelings and just put them into a jar full of water and let it sit around for an hour, and that's it. And that's how you get a nice strong wintergreen flavored drink. So it'll taste like drinking a wintergreen lifesaver. So, all right, so, and yes, you can tap trees for bark, for sap. So let's just wait till we find one that's big enough, and then I'll talk to you about that. All right? Any questions? Okay. Okay, so right here we've got a second scratch and sniff plant. So this is sassafras, and I'm going to scrape off two different places for you to sniff. So sniff the root and also sniff the upper bark. So here it is right here. Let me do one for this end here. Let me find one. Okay. So smell the upper part and smell the root where I scraped off both places. Okay, so here's sassafras, as some of you may know, and I wrote a book on foraging that I was just going to show you, and there's a chapter on sassafras in that book, and it mentions the fact that this is a plant that is quite common, especially the further you get toward the coast, southern New England coast. You're going to run into a lot of it, but there's a lot of it here in North Worcester County. And it's an exceedingly easy plant to recognize because it has leaves with three different shapes, leaves with no thumbs, one thumb, and two thumbs all in the same plant. Can you see that? All right, so it's the only plant that does that. And then even in the wintertime, if we were here like walking dog, cross-country skiing, and you see the bright green color in the twigs, do this scratch and sniff. If you're getting the lemony flavor that you're smelling today, then you know it's sassafras. So, so the root is one of the edible flavorings, and it has that very familiar root beer smell. And sassafras was used to flavor root beer for a long, long time, and other things too. And then about 60 years ago, a couple studies were done where they were studying something called saffrol, which is an essential oil that's in the sassafras root bark. And they fed a huge amount of synthesized saffrol to rats, and some of those rats got cancer. So the Food and Drug Administration just said, okay, that's it. We're going to ban saffrol-containing sassafras root products from the food supply, and that ban is still in effect. But since then, people like me, other people that are familiar with this plant, we've looked long and hard, and all we figured out is that saffrol might be carcinogenic to rats in huge amounts, but we don't know of any studies that shows that people get cancer from sassafras, not even anecdotally. But if you decide to say, okay, if the FDA says it's carcinogenic, that's it, that's all I need to know, I'm not going to use it, I totally support you in that. In fact, I totally support you wherever your comfort level is about anything I teach today. So if you're not confident you've identified the right thing, or that you've prepared it correctly, whatever, and you chicken out and you don't eat it, I think that's very sensible. All right, so you can make a sassafras tea from the roots if you want to do it, and you just simmer them in hot water for a little while and the flavor will come out. You can usually reuse the roots several times before they lose their potency. And in my book, I've got a recipe for sassafras candy, which is like the root beer barrels you used to buy at the penny candy store, only even better because there's little bits of root bark embedded in the candy. And then, so that's the root. Then the upper part of the plant, I had a woman a few years back that said to her that smell, when I scratched off the bark and she sniffed it, she said to her it smelled just like Fruit Loop cereal. And I remember what Fruit Loop cereal smells like, and I have to agree with her. It's a bizarre similarity. I mean, they're not using sassafras in Fruit Loops. It's just a weird coincidence. But anyway, that same flavor that's in the twigs is also in the leaves. You can eat young sassafras leaves straight into your mouth, or what is often done with them is they're used to make something called filet powder. If you've ever heard of filet powder, like filet gumbo, that is made from dried powdered young sassafras leaves. So this time of year, it's way too late to gather them, but in the spring when they first come up and they're about an inch long, you gather a bunch of leaves, just spread them out on a cookie sheet and allow them to dry, and then just pulverize them, sift out any fibers, and then take that powder and put it in a salt or pepper type shaker and then add it to your food near the end to flavor and thicken it. And there's none of this, there's no saffrol in the leaves, so you don't have to worry about that issue in that case. Okay, we got it? Yeah. All right. And by the way, one thing I did before I pulled out any plants is I checked to make sure I was seeing a lot of sassafras plants in there, because it could potentially be harmful if there were just a few and you yank them up. But sassafras typically grow as multi-stem clones, so it is very likely that all these places where you're seeing sassafras plants come up is they're connected by a common root system. So you're just looking at individual stems off one organism. So if you're just pulling some up, it's not going to harm the plant. And anybody that has tried to maintain an area that sassafras is growing right next to it will attest to that, because it's constantly trying to reinvade the field where the clearing has happened. Okay? Okay. All right. Can you see it? Got the camera on it? Okay, so I heard somebody mention wild strawberry. It's actually not wild strawberry, but it is related. This is a plant called dewberry, and this is a prostrate blackberry. So when it produces a fruit, it looks and tastes exactly like a blackberry. But instead of growing as the big canes, which I think we're going to see later, the habitat for this plant is just sprawling along the ground. And so, so it's called dewberry. There's two different species, and the only difference is one has fruit that ripens in July and one has fruit that ripens in August when blackberries ripen.
DEW berry.
DEW, yeah, because it's growing along the ground, so the dew beads up on it in the morning. All right, so we'll talk more about plants in the rubus genus later, but I just wanted to point this one as we were going by it. All right, Shagbark hickory is to look at the leaves, and you'll see 3 terminal leaves that are bigger than the 2 other leaves, and this whole thing is a compound leaf, so these are leaflets. So look for that, and then look for a very shaggy bark, and that's your shagbark hickory. All right. And these are grapevines. Let me see if I could just isolate it here from the other stuff around me. Okay, all right. So, so this is one of the variety of grapes that grows around here. So this is called the fox grape, and this is the ancestor of the Concord grape. So the Concord grape was derived from this. And this one produces the large purple grapes that are ripe around the first or second week of September, and if you're lucky, you smell them before you see them. You're walking and riding your bike along, and all of a sudden, grapes, grapes, where's that smell coming from? And you follow your nose to the vine and find a vine like this, loaded with ripe grapes, and then you stuff your face by the vine, which is a lot of fun. So the way to recognize the fox grape are the leaves are finely woolly in the underside and white or a coppery color like this. So, in an ordinary year, it is possible that we might be able to find a few stray fox grapes on the plants, but because of how dry it's been, a lot of vines just gave up and did not hold their berries till firmly ripe because they couldn't get enough moisture from the soil to enable that to happen. So it has not been the best grape gathering year. But even so, you know, if you try hard enough, you can usually find some that are okay. Probably not this late. This is more of a first 2 weeks of September harvesting opportunity. And so when I gather these grapes, I'll just bring them home and throw them in a pot like a lobster pot with, you know, a good amount of water. It's not so that the grapes are bobbing around in the water, but close to, you know, level with the amount of grapes in the water. And I'll simmer them for a while and then put everything through a food mill, or if you don't have one of those, you can use a sieve or a strainer. And then we'll hold the seeds and the skins back. And then what goes through your food mill or strainer, it's a puree, and you can drink it. It's like a delicious wild grape juice, or you can make grape jam or grape jelly from it, or grape sorbet, or grape chiffon pie, or grape cheesecake. It's good all those ways. It's really yummy. I make grape sorbet, which is very easy to make. If you've got one of those Danvier style ice cream makers, you just have to add sugar, because those of you that make your own ice cream and sherbet, you know that chilling subdues sweetness, and it won't be sweet enough if you don't spike it with a little sugar so that when it's cold it still tastes sweet. But it's really yummy. So so this is the fox grape. Then also, I don't think we're going to see any today, but here, very close by, like the plant that I referred to before that's growing on the fence at the Catholic Church in Clinton, is Riverside grape. And that one, the leaves are smooth and green on the underside. And that one will still have grapes on it unless the plant gave up because it's so dry. And the grapes will be smaller. These grapes can be up to 1 inch in diameter. The Riverside grapes will be smaller. They'll be up to 1/2 inch in diameter. And the flavor is kind of musky. It's not as yummy straight into your mouth as this species is. You could still make grape jam or grape jelly with them, but some people prefer the fox grape leaves for stuffing, to make the stuffed grape leaves. And the best time to gather those leaves is late spring, early summer. You know, I saw some Riverside grape leaves in the last couple days that you probably could get away with stuffing, but usually by this time of year it's way too late because the leaves look like this. They're old and they're not very appetizing at all. And, so if this had been earlier in the season, I would have gone into more details about how to make stuffed grape leaves. But let me tell you one other way that you can use grape leaves. And I would try to find one that's looking younger than this, you know, something that's, you know, fresher and greener, like, you know, something closer to the end of the vine like that. Is if you make pickles and you take a grape leaf, and as far as you know, it doesn't matter what kind, and you put it in the jar where those pickles are, or whatever it is that you're pickling, those pickles will come out crisper because that grape leaf was in there. I think just one. Yeah, it's the tartaric acid that's in the grape leaves that tightens the tissues of whatever it is that you're pickling. All right, there is an edible vine here though, and it looks like this. I should say another edible vine because the one I just taught you was a vine. So this is a member of the pea family called groundnut. This has a chapter in my book. And the main edible part on a groundnut are the tubers, and the tubers are available year round. So anytime you could find this plant. So we could be here in the wintertime, and if we saw the dried stalks from the previous season's groundnut, we could follow them into the ground. So I'm going to attempt on camera to find you a groundnut tuber. So what you need to do, so first of all, I'm going to check and make sure there's no poison ivy right here. Because if you dig where the poison ivy is growing, you're likely to get it. So you have to find a groundnut vine. So here's one right here. And see where it goes into the ground. Okay, right here. And then what you want to do is very carefully, without severing the vine going into the ground, dig around it to see if you can find a tuber. Oh, I hit another root. That might complicate my search here a little bit. So I might have to try again on a different one because it's diving underneath another root. Okay. Let me try again. Okay, so while I'm doing that, right here though is a wild strawberry. So somebody was asking about wild strawberry. So here's a wild strawberry, and this is what they do. They're like spider plants, is they have these runners. This is one way that they reproduce. And so this is a great plant for encouraging to grow in your lawn, because these little babies will find the bare patches in your lawn and fill them in. And then in the spring, these have delightful little white 5-petal flowers that the pollinators will visit. And then they form those small but delectable little red fruits. Now you can make tea from wild strawberry leaves when the leaves are fresh or thoroughly dried. Apparently when they're wilted, they're slightly toxic. But fresh or thoroughly dried is fine. And the tea that you make from the leaves tastes at least vaguely like the fruit. And it does have vitamin C in it. So if you felt a case of scurvy coming on, you could rush out and make yourself some strawberry leaf tea. All right, so let's go across the way here, and I might try a different vine on this side. So once again, checking for poison ivy. Here's the vine right here, going into the ground. See if I'm any luckier on this side. Okay, yeah, I found one. Okay, so here's a groundnut tuber, and this is a pretty average size one. They can get to be more than twice as big, like a golf ball. So this is the main edible part of the plant, so I'm just going to cut it so you can see what it looks like inside. So you see it's nice and starchy inside, and I got reminded the other day that these have about 3 times the amount of protein in them as like a potato. And so my book tells the story about how this is a really important food for Native Americans, and it enabled the Pilgrims to survive the first harsh winter in the New World by eating groundnuts. And there are a bunch of ways you can use these, but my favorite way so far to use them is just to slice them thinly and fry them in a little vegetable oil and make groundnut chips, and they're quite good that way. So that's groundnut. Any questions on this one?
Are they in the potato family?
No, they're related to peas and peanuts and beans. They're in that family. And if you look at the leaves, you can see that those of you that are gardeners and grow beans, you'll see the resemblance to these leaves to what bean leaves look like.
Yeah.
Okay? All right, let's keep going. So this is a plant called false Solomon seal. So true Solomon seal has its flowers and its berries in the underside of the stalk, and false Solomon seal has its flowers and the berries in a terminal cluster at the end of the stalk. So these are ripe berries, and these are edible right now.
Oh, really?
And if you ate one, you would see that the flavor is kind of like cranberry sauce sweetened with molasses is the closest thing I could think of. All right, but I'll just tell you one thing that you might want to be aware of, and that is one of the nicknames for these berries is scoot berries, because you might have to scoot for the nearest bathroom if you eat too many of them. So it's never happened to me. So I think you'd have to have a good-sized handful to have that effect on you, but I'll just let you know that, just so you're aware. All right, so that's the false Solomon seal berries. So it's the plants that look like this growing along the side of the path, and this is jewelweed. So this is the plant that has been clinically proven to cure poison ivy for some people. I'm apparently not one of those people. But anyway, for some people it works, and what you do is you just snap off the root and take the rest of the plant. So earlier in the season it would be a little better because it would be juicier, and you can just scrunch it up and extract the juice out and then apply the juice where you either have poison ivy or where you think you're exposed to poison ivy. And it's even possible that if you put it on your skin before you're exposed to poison ivy, it might reduce the likelihood that you get poison ivy.
Does that have a little orangey flower?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, so those flowers have mostly gone by now because this plant is very cold sensitive. Oh, you found a couple, thank you. Yeah.
That's what I said.
Right, and so, all right, so if you want that remedy year round, what you do is you can gather up a bunch of these plants and bring them home and throw them in a blender, or you could throw them in a pot with some water and boil it up, and then take that liquid and pour it into ice cube trays and freeze it, and then you could just take an ice cube and put that on your skin. And some people claim that the jewelweed juice is good for all kinds of skin irritations, even athlete's foot. All right, now let's get to the edible part of jewelweed. So the edible part of jewelweed is the seeds inside a ripe seed pod. And this is where the challenge begins. And you've all got a great opportunity to do this right now, is when the seed pods are ripe, they explode at the slightest touch. So let's capture this on the camera here. So who would like to be my helper? Anybody volunteering? Okay, so what you, see, it was so much of a hair trigger, it went off, was that on camera? All right, we'll do another one. Okay, all right. Yeah, no worries, no worries. There's a lot of these today. All right, so, okay, see, here we have two seed pods. We have one that isn't ripe and one that is ripe, and when it makes a 90-degree angle like that, it's ripe. So just gently, let's hang it like that. Pinch the bottom. Okay. So what you want to do, though, is collect those seeds. And so find a ripe seed pod and just have it explode in your hand.
Yeah.
All right? So here's one like this.
Okay.
So you just grab it and have it explode in your hand. Don't worry, it won't hurt. And then when you open up your hand, you'll see these little football-shaped things.
Yeah.
Those are the ripe seeds, and if you eat them, you find they taste just like walnuts, like store-bought English
Well,
walnuts.
there's plenty of these around.
All right, well, give it a try then. See if you can capture it.
I got one.
Okay.
Oh wow, that's incredible.
All right. So, and so feel free, we'll be here for a few minutes, so feel free to give that a try. And let me just tell you one other thing, and that is, and you don't need to do this to eat it, but just to see, is if you take one of these ripe seeds and you gently rub the outer covering off, the inner color is this beautiful bright robin's egg blue color. And I have no idea why that color's in there, because no creatures ever see it. It's just one of those unexplained mysteries of Mother Nature. All right, if anybody's having trouble finding a jewelweed seed, you feel free to take one of mine. Okay.
Do you know, do you have to do anything special to the seed if, say, you want to collect it and then you want to, like, say somebody that doesn't have it wants to grow it?
Yes, so my recommendation would be is to sow the ripe seeds right away in the ground and just let them go through a winter outside,
Okay.
and then they'll spring up in the spring.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of people that, I have a ton of this plant.
Yes.
And there's a lot of people that
Yeah.
want this plant.
Right.
So I didn't know if there was a way I could get seed to them.
Yeah, I mean, you could hold on to it for a little while, just put it in a plastic bag and don't let it dry out, and then give it to them, and then, you know, they could, one really easy container to sow things in is one of those clamshell cartons that you buy your strawberries in, and just fill it with a little potting mix, and then just sow the seeds in there, and just stick it like underneath a bench in your yard, and just, you know, allow the winter to get at it, and you know, and because the seeds want to go through winter, that's how it happens naturally in the wild.
They have to scarify or?
No, it's not scarification, it's stratification.
Okay.
Stratification means going through winter, basically. All right, we got it? All right, so now you know what to do. So don't wait too long, because once the weather really gets cold, we get a frosty night, these will all disappear. I guarantee, and this is proving it right here, that I'm going to teach you something, and then I'm going to see a much better example of it further down the trail. And this is a better example of the foxgrape leaves than what we saw before. So as we're going by, I'm just pointing out some low bush blueberries, which are right here. So, so when I'm out in nature, I'm always paying attention to what's there, because just like today, it's frequently true that whatever snapshot you're getting of nature, the day you're out in it, there's going to be stuff that was ripe, will be ripe, is ripe, and so I file that information away. So if I see a blueberry patch, I remember where it is, and then I know to go back in July and look for the blueberries. So this is the low bush. In habitat like this would be actually awesome habitat for high bush blueberries too, and I'm sure there are some here. And high bush blueberries offer really fun foraging opportunity because they like to grow near the water, and usually when they grow near the water, they're getting sun because the sunlight's reaching the surface of the pond, and lots of moisture, and so they'll bear heavily. So it's kind of like tomatoes in your garden. The more sun plants get, usually the more heavier they bear. So that's another reason why it's good to look for hazelnuts under power lines. So, so in July, if you time your paddle right, you can launch a boat into Botterwadi like this, where the high bush blueberries are overhanging the water, and you could just stuff your face right from the seat of your canoe or kayak. It's really fun, and I have done that in this area. And that's immediate gratification. So some of this stuff, you got to bring it home and cook it and stuff like that. With blueberries, of course, it's just, I admire you if you have enough discipline to actually get any home and not just eat them all right away. That's definitely even more true with wild strawberries. So this, when I first saw this by the trail, I thought, oh, it's an American chestnut, but actually it's a chestnut oak. So because it's an oak tree, but the leaf is trying to resemble a chestnut. If this were a chestnut, these would be pointier, these lobes, and they'd have little points on the end, and the leaf would be longer. So, but I'll just use this as a prop to talk about eating acorns. So all oak trees produce acorns, although not uniformly heavily every year. Like last year was a huge mast year. There are acorns all over the place, and this year, in comparison, there are way fewer acorns. But any acorn is edible if you just leach enough tannic acid out of it. So, the common belief, and I can attest to this, is that the acorns from what are called the soft oak species seem to have lower levels of tannic acid in them. So the soft oaks are the one like this chestnut oak or white oak would fall to this category, where there are rounded lobes on the leaf. So like behind you over there on the ground, I see some black oaks which have pointy lobes on the leaves. So the acorns, like right here, right here. So this would, an oak tree with leaves like this with pointy lobes would produce an acorn that's higher in tannic acid. So you can eat any acorn, it's just how much patience do you have to leach the tannic acid out. So, but if you do it and then you, this is explained in my book, but you can basically leach the tannic acid out, dry the nut meats out, throw them in a food processor, grind them up to make an acorn nut meal or flour. And that's a really nice thing to add to regular flour for baking, because the acorn nut meats have a very distinctive and nice flavor. And even if you use it as just like 1/3 of the flour total in whatever you're baking, so it's like 1/3 acorn flour, 1/3 wheat flour, 1/3 cornmeal, the acorn flour is still strong enough to persist through the final baking product. All right, so any questions about eating acorns?
How do you leach them?
Yeah.
Oh, so there is a cold water method and a hot water method. So the hot water method gives you quicker results. So you get a big pot of water boiling on the stove, shell the nut meats, which I will do with a pair of pliers because the outside is very soft. Throw the shelled nut meats into the water and start boiling it, and it will turn a coppery color, which is the tannic acid coming out. In all the books, they keep repeating that process until the water stops turning color, but I usually get bored doing that, and I'll stop after, like 2 or 3 iterations and figure that's enough, because I'm usually starting with acorns that are relatively low in tannic acid, so I don't have to leach that much out anyway. And then, as I say, I spread them out in a cookie sheet to dry them and then grind them up in a food processor, and then I make bake stuff with the nut meal or the flour. All right, so here is a high bush blueberry. And although this one isn't overhanging the water, you get the idea for what these bushes can do. And so that's why, you know, if you're paddling in a waterway where there are high bush blueberries overhanging the water, you know, they can, you know, I mean, you might have to hop out of your kayak and go pick them on the shore. But anyway, they'll be close by. I think you're all smart enough to know that you're not eating edible fiddleheads this time of year. But this is a species that you can eat. So this is called a bracken fern. And the way to distinguish the bracken fern from the other ferns is it branches out into 3 branches at the top. So when this is at the edible fiddlehead stage, which is the only time ferns are edible, when they're curled up like that. So there's 3 little curled up parts, so it looks kind of like an eagle claw. So, so in the spring, you just see a little curled up part like that, and I will feel with my fingers to where it starts getting stiff and snap it off there. So I usually get like 4 or 5 inches of stem with a little curled up part, and that's the part that I will eat. And so you can steam them or boil them until they're nice and tender, and then eat them. And the flavor is quite similar to asparagus. So they are tasty, and this is various cousins of this species that are also bracken ferns are eaten the world over, like this very popular vegetable in Japan and Korea. The bad news is, recently it's been discovered that there's a correlation between people that make this a staple of their diet. So they're eating meal after meal after meal of the bracken fern fiddleheads over a prolonged period of time, and people that have an elevated incidence of bladder and or stomach cancer. All right. So I can't recommend eating this one on a regular basis. I have eaten it. It was tasty. Just I will give you that warning.
Do they know what chemical or compound causes that cancer?
I'm sure they do, and I don't. Okay. I just know enough to, you know, not eat it on a regular basis. All right?
The other ferns don't make a fiddlehead.
Almost all ferns go through the fiddlehead stage, but I only know of 2 that taste good, and only one that's safe to eat in quantity, which is not this one. It's the ostrich fern. And that one does grow here and there in Worcester County, but where you're more likely to see it is where the soil has a higher pH in Western Mass and like Connecticut Valley, the Berkshires.
Those the really tall ones, the ones that really plume out.
Yeah. I mean, they probably get about that tall. On my web page, and I would ordinarily in-person walk, I'd be giving you handouts, I'd be giving you things I made from wild foods to try, and I'm sorry I can't do all that because of what we're going through. But anyway. But on my webpage, there's an article from Yankee Magazine that talks about ostrich fern fiddleheads. And in that article, there's a little inset box that tells you the 5 ways to distinguish the ostrich fern from any other species of fern. So what looks like an ostrich fern may very well not be an ostrich fern. When I picked this spot for doing the walk, I thought, well, if we have any kind of a normal summer into the early fall, there should be mushrooms on this walk because the habitat is very good for it. But unfortunately, as you know, it's been dry as a bone the last week and 2 weeks and plus. So it just has not been good to produce mushrooms. And this particular one, I'm sorry to say, is not an edible species. So yeah, that's just a smaller version of this. All right. So this is our regional version of what I call the Grimm's fairy tale mushroom, the one with the red cap with a little white flecks on top. So that's Amanita muscaria, which is the fly agaric mushroom, which is not safe to eat. And in fact, this genus, the Amanita genus, is responsible for about 90% of all mushroom fatalities. And so yes, so there are some edible ones, but I'm not brave enough to eat any. So I will just show you what's going on with this one. All right, so it's broken on me, but it's very common to see a swollen base like this for Amanita mushrooms, and often this part sits in what's called a cup or a vulva, the bottom like that. And then what's not showing on this one because it's fallen off is the veil that hangs down like a skirt on an Amanita mushroom. And then, although these are yellowish, because it's old, the color of the gills here are white on Amanita mushroom. And so these little things here are called the universal veil remnants. So they also covered the cap when it was young, and then when the cap bursts through the veil, little pieces of the veil are left on the cap. So nothing edible about that one. I haven't harmed myself by touching it. I'm not going to lick my fingers afterwards, but you have to ingest, unless you're really, really frail person and the teensiest amount of exposure to something toxic could, finish you off, then maybe you'd have to worry about it. But for most normal people, look at, I'm giving a ride to all these seeds. This is a plant called beggar's ticks. And it's actually a native species, but even so, it'd be a pain to pick those off later. Okay, so these are an edible mushroom. So amazingly, I found an edible mushroom to show you, although it's a little misleading to see a clump like this because these usually grow singly on the ground. So this is what is called a Sewillis mushroom, and it's in the bolete group of mushrooms. And you'll see, unlike the one I just showed you, there's no gills in the underside of the cap. It's a spongy layer. So that's what the group of mushrooms called boletes have in common. And so you pay attention to the color of the spongy layer, the color of the cap, and what's going on with the stalk and so on. So this particular kind is called a dotted stalk Sewillis because it has little pinpricky pink dots on the stalk. And you almost always see it underneath white pine trees. Are there any white pine trees around here? Yeah, okay, so not surprised to see it here. And so edible mushrooms fall into 3 different categories. There's edible, good, and choice. And edible means, you can eat it, but the flavor's not really worth writing home about. And most mushroom hunters won't bother with a merely edible species if they're seeing ones that are higher on the yumminess spectrum. So this falls into the merely edible category. And what people will also do sometimes is peel the cuticle, which is just the layer of covering over the cap off, because that can get a little slimy. And sometimes they take the pores off too, and they're just eating the flesh between the cap color and the pores. And so the standard way to cook a bolete is to chop it up and put it into a cast iron skillet and start cooking it without any butter or oil at all. And that's called a dry cooking method. And for a very moist mushroom, which these usually are, you're basically kind of flash drying them in the pan. And as they begin to brown and crisp up, that's when you add your butter or your oil. Because if you start putting them right into the butter or oil, they'll be slimy. And if you dry cook them, they'll be much more appetizing that way. So I'll just leave these here in case you want to take a quicker look at them. Let me just explain what's going on with the caps. So the basic mushroom morphology is when mushrooms are young, the caps are bell-shaped like that. And as they get older, they splay out like that. So if you're seeing a mushroom cap like that, it's usually a very old mushroom. All right?
And you've eaten those?
I have, yeah. Yeah, as I say, the flavor isn't wonderful, but it is edible. So, if you're, let's say, camping and you've got some pasta and you want to put some mushrooms in it, and this is the only species you're finding, it's fine to put in there.
Is a younger or an older mushroom tastier? Any difference?
Usually the older the mushroom, the stronger the flavor, and in general, I like them when they're milder flavors, so I would favor the younger ones. So let me just say that, all right, and this is, since we started talking about mushrooms, I have to warn you about mushrooms, okay? Because the risk of eating a plant and getting very sick and even possibly dying is relatively low here in this region because there are a few exceptions, but the vast majority of poisonous plants taste horrible. So my advice is don't eat plants that taste bad. It doesn't mean that every plant's going to be delicious straight from the bush or the vine, whatever, but if you prepare it according to how you're supposed to prepare it, and it should be safe then and tasty then, and you take a bite and it doesn't taste good, I wouldn't override that danger signal your taste buds might be giving you. Now, unfortunately, that rule does not apply to mushrooms because we have at least a half a dozen species of mushrooms that grow around here that are potentially lethal, and there's nothing from the flavor whatsoever that gives you any advanced indication that there's something that might be poisonous about them. So you could have this delicious mushroom meal one day and be dead several days later from liver and or kidney failure. All right, so the risk of picking the wrong kind of mushroom and getting very sick and possibly dying is much greater than for plants. Having said that, you can arrange all the mushroom species there are in a line and cluster to one end are those species that are virtually impossible to confuse with anything poisonous versus those at the other end that even the experts can't tell apart. And as long as you stay at the safe end of the line and you gradually work your way out as you gain experience and confidence, that's how you stay out of trouble. Everybody get that? All right, so it'd be nice to come back to this spot some other year when it has been rainy, and you would see what I mean about, there being way more mushrooms here than we're seeing today. So these are the next plants I'm going to talk about. I'm just going to take a second to see, these are biennials, and I'm just going to look and see if I find any first-year plants that I can point out to you, because they often grow near each other. So, all right, well, let's see if I can find a decent leaf to show you on any of these plants. Once again with the drought, the plants are definitely shorting out faster.
Kind of.
So whether you're looking at these tall plants right here or these tall plants right here, they're all the same. These are all wild lettuce plants. And wild lettuce plants are biennials, which means they have a 2-year life cycle. The first year, you're just seeing a bunch of leaves like this, which looks like an overgrown dandelion. And these are related to dandelions. And then the second year, the plants bolt. So this is what lettuce does in your garden if you don't pick it in time. It just shoots up like that, goes to flower, goes to seed. So after these plants have finished dropping their seeds, these plants will die. That's their life cycle. But their hope is that the seeds will find a place along the trail here and start new plants next year. So all wild lettuces are edible. It's just that some taste better than other ones. So this particular variety, wild lettuce, and all these plants are the same. They all have first-year leaves that look like this. And the second-year leaves also look like this too until they short it out, because the plants has a single-minded focus now, which is ripen those seeds, ripen those seeds. So it will sacrifice every bit of the rest of the plant in order to send all the moisture up there to finish that job. So anyway, so this particular species is edible, but it tends to be bitter from the get-go. I mean, you could still boil the leaves up and eat it and as a cooked vegetable, but when I hear lettuce, I want to eat it raw like you would regular lettuce. So I'm going to modify this leaf to show you the variety of wild lettuce that is yummy at the raw stage. So the terminal lobe is skinny like a finger. So if you can imagine the leaves coming off like this, but the terminal lobe is skinny like that. So that's Lactuca canadensis, and that variety is quite mild even after the plants begin to bolt, which is around Memorial Day. You could still harvest them when they're like 1.5 feet tall. And I mean, by the time any lettuce, I don't care, it could be your state fair, blue ribbon, prize-winning lettuce, by the time it's done this, it's not going to taste good. So anyway, but the Lactuca canadensis with the skinny terminal lobe like a finger, that's what you want to look for. And that one is mild even after it begins to bolt. Stems, leaves, everything. And this is exactly the kind of habitat that wild lettuce likes to grow in, is a trail or a dirt road going through the woods where the sunlight is coming down and hitting the trail. That's where where I typically see wild lettuce. All right, we got it?
And it would be low at the time.
It would be low, yes. So this is the best time to harvest this one would be in May or early June. All right, so we found a pretty wildflower that I don't consider edible, although it is an ingredient in Moxie, the tonic Moxie, and that is gentian, which is right here. So this is a gentian flower, and it's a relatively late blooming flower, and that's all it does. It never opens up. So this is called a bottle gentian. And the bumblebee forces its way in there to get at the pollen or the nectar. So the roots are very bitter, and there was a time, like back in the 19th century, where it was quite popular to drink digestive bitters with your meal to help you digest the food that you were eating. And I understand that their bitters are kind of having a comeback right now for a couple reasons. First of all, the bartenders are trying to outcompete with each other, to have nifty cocktails that other people don't have. So there's that, and also some of the herbalists are saying it's good to eat bitter things because it activates your liver, and And that's an important thing to do. And the modern diet is, we've purged the bitter stuff out of our diet at the expense of, our body, needing that stimulus for certain organs like liver. So anyway, so that's what gentian is used for. I don't know any other details than that. I don't know which species of gentian goes into moxie and whatnot. Okay, so behind us right here, got another edible wild plant. So this tree right here is a black cherry. And so black cherries have long pointy leaves, which are known as lancelet because they're kind of like the tip of a spear. And another way to recognize them is the bark is charcoal in color and it flakes off in like potato chip sized pieces. So look for that. And as I mentioned before, if you actually want to find black cherries on plants, you want to look for trees that are out in the open, so not so much that are on the edge of a forest like here. So on the edge of a road, on the edge of a field, the middle of the field, that's where you're going to see the most fruit. But this year has been a horrible year for black cherries, choke cherries, stuff like that, because the plants just gave up on trying to produce ripe fruit. So ordinarily, you'd find these ripe fruit on black cherries toward the end of the summer. So it's too late. It'd be more like the first week of September is when I'd be looking for black cherries. And they're shiny and black, and they grow in racemes where you have a central stalk and then the little cherries come on off the sides. Usually like 12 to 15 cherries per cluster. And the flavor of black cherries varies quite a bit from tree to tree. Sometimes they're puckering and astringent, not very good at all. And then other times they can be quite sweet and just about as good as a store-bought cherry, except for the fact that they're small. There's no getting around that. So black cherries, the individual cherry fruits will approach but not quite get to a ½ an inch in diameter, and the pits inside each fruit aren't that much smaller than conventional cherry pits. So wouldn't recommend trying to use black cherries for any recipe that require pitting each individual fruit, because that would be exceedingly tiresome. So what I tend to do is just stuff my face by the tree when I find one that has nice flavored fruit. But if you wanted to make something from them, you just gather up a bunch of the fruit, strip the ripe fruit off the central stalks, throw it in some water in a saucepan and simmer it for a while, soften it up, put everything through a food mill or a sieve, and then the pits are held back, and then the pulp and the juice goes through, and that's the raw material you use for making black cherry jelly and jam and cordials and fruit soup, stuff like that. Okay, so the only last thing I want to say about black cherry is the only edible part of a black cherry is the ripe fruit. There's nothing else on the plant that's edible. In fact, most of the rest of the plant has a chemical in it which is metabolized into cyanide by the body. Now, I have heard of people making their own cough syrup from black cherry bark. I guess if you had enough of it, you'd stop coughing. So if you do that, I hope you know what you're doing. Next plant I'm going to teach you is this guy right here. There's some growing along the road, but I think we'll have a quieter time in here, so I might as well teach it here. So this plant is pokeweed. This is a chapter in my book on pokeweed, and it's a delicious plant, but there's only one edible stage, and it's only available around Memorial Days. So there's nothing that's edible about the plant now. So the berries aren't edible. The root is definitely not edible. So all this part of the plant, this mature plant, the berries, the root, have a chemical in them called phytolachin, which is a purgative. So in very minute amounts, it might have some therapeutic value, but if you eat too much of it, it's going to make everything on the inside of your body want to get to the outside of your body through every available means as quickly as possible. Okay, so that would be nasty. So you want to harvest this plant in the spring when it's at the shoot stage. It's an herbaceous perennial, so all this is going to die back. And then in May is when the shoots come up. And what the plant usually does, and there's just a little remnant here, is you often have the stalk from last year's plant still remaining in the spring. So this stuff here, when the cold weather comes, it won't completely disappear. It will remain as a dried stalk, and you can even see where the berries were attached. So if you see a spot like that in May, where you have the shoots coming up, you'll know those are pokeweed shoots. You have to boil them for 7 minutes to make them safe to eat, but they won't shrink or get all mushy on you even after all that boiling. And then the flavor and texture is sort of like asparagus, but it's really its own unique, nice flavor.
With the leaves or the stalks that you boil down?
So the young shoots, when they're like 6 to 10 inches tall, that's it. That's the only safely edible part of the plant, and you have to boil it for 7 minutes before you can eat it. Okay? So that's pokeweed. We got that one? All right, then right over here, just shift down a few feet. So this is a burdock plant. At the stage where it's got the round burrs that are trying to get caught in your socks, your dog's fur. And the guy who invented Velcro did get the idea from these burrs, by the way. So this is a wonderfully edible plant, but not now. So this is another biennial plant where the first year you just have big leaves that look like rhubarb leaves, but if you flip them upside down, you see they're finely woolly, and the petioles, the leaf stalks, are slightly furry, and they're green or green streaked with a little purple, and they have ridges on them like a celery stalk. Whereas if it were rhubarb, they'd be smooth and reddish. Rhubarb leaves are poisonous, but there's nothing poisonous in burdock. In fact, it has a chemical in it which just makes you healthier to eat it. So it's a very highly regarded plant by macrobiotic diet people, by herbalists and stuff like that. And so we will probably see another one, and it would have been a better plant to teach, but I'm just doing this one here now because here it is. So earlier in the season, in late April, early May, the leaves would just be emerging from the second year's growth. And that's a good time to dig up the plant to eat the root. But you can't just grab that above ground foliage and yank on it and get a root out that way. They'll break on you. So you have to dig the roots out, which is a lot of work, and I don't usually bother. And I pretty much guarantee that your patience will give out before the root does, because it's very, very long. And so you'd be digging and digging. At some point you say, oh, the heck with it, and you just slice off what you have, and you might have a length of root about that long. It kept going. And so a standard way to cook it at this stage, you don't have to peel or anything, just wash it off, slice it into half-inch thick rounds and boil it in salted water till it's tender, which is about 15 minutes, and it will taste like a starchy artichoke. But I'm too lazy to do that. Instead, I'm eating this part of the plant, the flowering stalk, just way before this stage. When it first emerges, which is around the first or second week of June, so it's about 1.5 feet tall. And the stalk at that stage will be very soft and pliable. It won't be stiff like it is now. So you cut it off at ground level, you lop off the top cluster leaves, and then you have to peel the very outer layer of the stalk because it's stringy or bitter. But once you peel all that off, the stalks are solid all the way through. So then you have basically an elongated artichoke heart. So you chop the peeled stalk up and you boil that in salted water till it's tender, which is about 5 minutes. And it's a delicious vegetable just plain like that, or it's really good thrown in spaghetti sauce, or it's really good in the dish where ordinarily you'd use artichoke hearts, and you mix it with the Parmesan cheese and the mayonnaise and the breadcrumbs, and you bake it in the oven. It's a spread that you put on crackers. Well, you could substitute the boiled burdock flower stalks for the artichoke hearts in that recipe. It works great. And that recipe's on my webpage. So if you have any trouble finding me online, you could just type Russ Cohen into Google, and my site will pop right up, and you can find the recipe page, and that recipe I just mentioned is in there. Okay? We got this one? Yeah. All right. Probably all heard the phrase, leaves of 3, let it be, which we've had to do with all the poison ivy we've encountered along this trail. So here's a plant with leaves of 3 that is not poison ivy. It's actually an edible plant called hog peanut, and it's related to the groundnut that I taught you already. So this one, unlike the groundnut, which has its tubers available year-round, this one only bothers to produce the tubers as the growing season is coming to a close, because it's basically needing a device to store food over the winter time. So what I'm going to do is follow this vine into the ground and see if I can find one of the little subterranean peas for you. So these vines are very delicate, so you have to even be more careful than the groundnut to try and find anything. Let's see what I can do here. So when I really have my act together, I get out ahead of all the people and I dig up the plants so I have them ready for you. So, okay. So I did not succeed. Let me try one more time. Let's try this guy right here. All right, well, I'm not succeeding, so I will just describe these for you. No, it isn't that it's too dry. I'm just, not having good luck. So anyway, so follow the vine into the ground and you will see, oh, actually, did I find one? So I did. So here's a little hog peanut. So this is about half the size they typically are. And they'll often be white with kind of a mottled purple jacket on the outside, which you can slip off. And you can eat these most ways you'd eat a pea. So you could boil it or bake it. And this is obviously something where, if you have friends or relatives over for supper and you need a massive side dish to feed them and they're coming in half an hour, you're not going to give them a hog peanut, because you're just not going to find enough under that kind of pressure. But if, let's say, you're camping and you're just hanging out the campsite for the weekend and you've got a nice patch of hog peanut and it's this time of year, an hour of assiduous digging will get you about a cup of these. And then, you can add them to what you're making. So, so this is called the hog peanut, and it has a cute little purple flower and then like a dollhouse scale little seed pod with little seeds in it that I've used to grow hog peanut plants. All right, you can also grow them from these guys too. Oop, I dropped it. All right, we got that one? Okay. As I told you was likely going to be happen, here's a much better example of burdock to teach you. All right, so here's a second year plant, but right here in the ground you can see the first year plants with the big leaves. So if you want to just grab one of those leaves at the base of the plant and just pull it up, just grab one leaf and pull it up. All right, so hold the leaf upside down and you see how it's finely woolly, it's not smooth like a rhubarb, and then this stalk right here is green or green streaked with a little purple and it has ridges on it like celery. So that's how you can tell it apart from rhubarb. Really related to olives, it's just the foliage has this silvery green color to it, sort of like olive tree leaves. And the edible part are the fruit, and this one seems to be bereft of fruit. I don't know why. But other places in this area, you can find hundreds of these plants, especially near Route 2 when the Mass Highway Department planted it before they knew it was invasive. So this is a banned plant now in Massachusetts. You can't buy it, you can't grow it deliberately. But you don't have to grow it deliberately because it grows all over the place. And you don't need to run out to the median strip at Route 2 to pick it because it loves to grow in gravel pits. And so, also I-190 all the way down to Worcester. Yeah. It's on both sides of the road, and any of the exits like Route 12 or any of the other intersections off I-190, you can find this plant. And I try to avoid picking it right along the road, but there's plenty of places where it's further away from the road. And it's called autumn olive because the fruit is ripe in the fall. In October is when I'm usually picking it. And a typical autumn olive has the branches bent down from the weight of the fruit because it fruits so prolifically. And this year it's just been, because of the drought, the fruit is sparser than normal. And so the fruit is ripe when you could just do these gentle tickling motions on the branches and the fruit is falling into your bucket or basket. And its flavor is nice. It does have vitamin C in it. And the USDA did a study of autumn olive fruit pulp a few years back, and they discovered that it's up to 18 times higher lycopene content than tomatoes. Oh. So, and lycopene is, I'm hearing more and more good news about how lycopene is good for you. Mm-hmm. All right, we got this one?
Mm-hmm. Where was it originally?
It's native? From Eurasia. It's from Manchuria. Right. So by the way, the apiarists, the beekeepers, like it because it's relatively late blooming and the honeybees like to visit these flowers. So now it's gone to seed. The plant mostly reproduces vegetatively by rhizomes, and off it where you see it along the road like here, one way that it spreads is on the snowplow blades. Oh. So the snowplows are plowing, and occasionally the plow gets below the snow and picks up a bit of dirt on the plow. And if there's knotweed there, a little rhizome will ride on that plow down the road and fall off and start a new colony. So this is a wonderfully edible plant, not now. So now it's very tall, it's very easy to spot. Remember where it is and then go back and get it at the right time, which is in this part of the world would be like the last week of April and the first 2 weeks of May. And so when it first comes out in the spring, what you're going to do is look for a whole bunch of dried stalks. Let me go in a little dried stalk.
One right down here.
All right. So you're going to see in the spring, you're going to see a bunch of dried reddish brown stalks like this. And it looks a lot like bamboo. It's not even distantly related to bamboo. It's a completely different branch of the plant world. So this plant is related to rhubarb and it tastes like rhubarb. So in the spring, amidst all these dried stalks in the previous year's growth, you see these shoots coming up, these green shoots with little red dots on the stems, the cluster leaves at the top. So when they're a foot tall, that's like the wild asparagus stage. You just cut them off at ground level and steam them for a few minutes and eat them hot or cold like asparagus. But my favorite stage to get them is at the wild rhubarb stage when the stalks are about this tall. So there's the ground level. So I harvest them when they're this big, and I like to find big fat sprouts because I peel the skin off of them because the skin is stringy and you get caught in your teeth. There's nothing poisonous about it. It's just better to take that off. But the knotweed stalks are hollow, so you don't want to peel too deeply or all you've left is a hole. You just want to get that very outer layer off. And then you'll end up with this green, crisp, and juicy piece of stem, which you can eat right on the spot. It's kind of like a Granny Smith apple. Or you can chop it up and use it instead of rhubarb in virtually any recipe calling for rhubarb. So in the upper left-hand corner of my book, there's a picture, on the cover, there's a picture of pie, and that is a strawberry knotweed pie that I love to make, and virtually everybody I serve that pie to say this is better than strawberry rhubarb pie. And since you're using it as a rhubarb substitute, so any other way that you use rhubarb, like making a compote or little squares or however you make it, using rhubarb, you can use the knotweed as a substitute without, really changing the recipe that would have used rhubarb otherwise. Okay, we got this one? All right. So I could go on about knotweed, but in the interest of teaching you more stuff on the way back to the car, let's keep going. So I do have this book that I forgot to bring on the walk, but I just showed it to you. So it covers a lot of the stuff we talked about today. And the books cost $15, and I give all the money to another regional land trust, the land trust that published the book, called the Essex County Greenbelt Association. So it's Essex County, Mass, which is northeast Mass, because Greenbelt allows foraging on all its properties that are open to the public, and it's dozens of properties covering hundreds of acres. So I just said, keep all the money the book makes, just buy more land with it. And so you just go to ecga.org and just pull up the maps and just go there and start nibbling. So, okay, so that's that.
It's a good book, I have it.
Oh, thank you. And then I am leading another walk, an in-person walk at Tower Hill a week from today. So I think at the same exact time, 3 to 5 p.m. So if you are already on this walk, it might be too much of an overlap for you. But if somebody you know wanted to come on this walk and couldn't, feel free to tell them about that walk. And that one costs money. You have to, Tower Hill, they charge for people to do things. So you just go to towerhillbg.org and find out the details of how to register for it. As far as I know, there's space still available on that walk.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Thank you.
Is that available on the website? Is it better for us to order it off a website?
Oh, yes, you can order off a website. You can order, like Greenbelt will sell it to you from its website. But also, their office was closed at one point and they weren't able to get in there and actually mail you a book. But and in case that's the case, I also give boxes of books to this bookstore called B Street Books. It's just bstreetbooks.com, and they'll mail you a book wherever you are. Thank you all out there in TV land. Thanks for watching.
Hi, I'm Lisa Adams from North County Land Trust. I'm the Outreach and Engagement Coordinator, and we are here today in Sterling thanks to a grant by the Sterling Cultural Council, which is part of the Massachusetts Cultural Council, a state agency. And we're here today doing a wild edibles walk with Russ Cohen. And we are so grateful to all of our members that we were able to invite to this today, and all of the volunteers and everyone that makes the land conservation possible for North County Land Trust. Since we are a regional land trust, we have the mission of conserving the farms, forests, and landscapes here in the region, and doing programs like this helps us to bring awareness to the importance of conservation so that we can continue to do the good work that we do. We hope that you enjoyed today's program, and be sure to check us out at northcountylandtrust.org for more information about membership, volunteering, and all of our events.